Welcome back, everyone. We're about to take a deep dive into the world of Jiu-Jitsu. Today, we're going to trace its evolution, starting from, the battlefields of feudal Japan, all the way to the various forms we see, dominating the grappling scene today. It's wild to think how a martial art once viewed as almost, feminine here in America became like a cornerstone of the UFC. So get ready for some serious surprises.
It really is a fascinating journey full of unexpected twists and turns. And to truly get how we ended up where we are today, we really got to start at the very beginning, you know? We got to start with Japanese Jujutsu.
Okay, yeah, let's go way back then.
Yeah.
Jiu-Jitsu, we're talking like samurai, secret fighting techniques, all that.
Exactly. Picture like feudal Japan, constant conflict, right? Samurai warriors developed jujitsu for those close combat situations. You know, when swords just weren't an option anymore, they needed a way to disarm, control, and ultimately defeat their opponents. We're talking throws, joint locks, strikes, grappling. It was all about survival in a life or death struggle.
Wow, so these samurai weren't messing around. But, I read that jiu-jitsu wasn't just limited to the battlefields of Japan. Apparently, it even caught the attention of military leaders around the world in the early 20th century.
That's right. Countries like Germany, they were really intrigued by how effective jiu-jitsu was. They started incorporating it into their military training. They saw its potential in, modern warfare.
Wow, so jiu-jitsu went global. But somewhere along the line, it also developed into a more formalized sport. Yeah. Judo, right? How does judo fit into all of this?
Judo is basically a direct descendant of Jujitsu. You have Jigoro Kano, this visionary martial artist. He developed Judo in the late 19th century. He took the core principles of Jujitsu, but, refined the techniques and added this strong emphasis on ethical principles. He saw Judo as not just a fighting art, but also as, a path to physical and moral development.
That's a really interesting distinction. So Judo took those raw fighting techniques and layered in, philosophy and personal growth?
Yeah. Kano really believed that the principles of leverage, technique, and a control that were used in judo could also be applied to, overcoming challenges in life. He wanted to create a martial art that would benefit both, individuals and society as a whole.
So judo wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about winning at life, too.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And this judo philosophy eventually made its way to Brazil, right? That's where, the story of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu really takes off.
You're absolutely right. It was a judo master named Mitsuyo Maeda who brought these arts to Brazil in the early 1900s. And this is where things get really interesting, leading to the birth of, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or BJJ, as it's commonly known.
Okay, I'm hooked. This is where the Gracie family enters the picture, right? The legends of BJJ. We're talking early UFC domination, proving the power of ground fighting, the whole deal.
The Gracies are definitely pivotal figures in the history of BJJ. They learned from Maeda, but they also adapted and refined the techniques, focusing heavily on the power of, leverage and technique to overcome larger opponents.
Yeah, those early UFC fights were mind-blowing. You had Royce Gracie, this relatively small guy, using BJJ to defeat much bigger, stronger opponents. It really captured people's imaginations.
It did, and those victories were absolutely crucial in establishing BJJ's credibility. People started to realize that, size and strength weren't everything. Technique and strategy, especially on the ground, could be even more effective.
It's wild to think that BJJ was once seen as almost a fringe martial art. Now it's a global phenomenon. Millions of people practice it.
The evolution of martial arts is fascinating, isn't it? And the jiu-jitsu story doesn't end with, the rise of BJJ. American grapplers were also watching, learning, and they started adding their own unique flavor to the mix.
Right. American Jiu-Jitsu, or AJJ as it's often called. I've heard it described as this blend of BJJ, wrestling, and other grappling arts. What makes it different from traditional BJJ? Is it really a completely different style?
The emergence of American Jiu-Jitsu is a really interesting chapter in this story. To understand it, you have to remember that American wrestlers and grapplers already had a strong tradition of their own.
Yeah, wrestling is huge in America. I remember being blown away by the intensity of those college wrestling matches I saw.
That wrestling base gave American grapplers a different perspective when they started training in BJJ. They saw ways to blend those techniques with their own wrestling skills.
So AJJ is more than just BJJ with a different name.
It's more about a shift in emphasis and a blending of styles. American Jiu-Jitsu often focuses more on the no-gi approach, which means grappling without the traditional uniform. And it incorporates a lot of wrestling techniques for takedowns and controlling positions.
And I've heard that Jake Shields, the fighter, played a role in popularizing the term American Jiu-Jitsu. Is there a story there?
There is. Shields actually started using the term American Jiu-Jitsu kind of as a joke at first. He was getting some criticism from traditional BJJ practitioners who didn't like his approach, which included a lot of wrestling and no-gi grappling. But the name stuck, and it's come to represent this American style of jiu-jitsu.
So we've got Japanese Jiu-jitsu leading to Judo and Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, and then American Jiu-jitsu adding its own twist to the mix. What's next in this evolution of grappling? Where does it go from here?
Well, we can't talk about this evolution without talking about Eddie Bravo and the rise of 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. This is where things get really interesting and maybe a little controversial.
Okay, I'm ready for the next chapter. Bring on 10th Planet.
10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu is a system created by Eddie Bravo. He's a very innovative and sometimes controversial figure in the world of grappling. He took the no-gi approach to a whole new level, developing a system that challenges many of the traditional BJJ conventions.
And 10th Planet has a reputation for being really creative and, like, unorthodox, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the key differences that set it apart?
One of the biggest differences is the emphasis on no-gi grappling. 10th Planet was specifically designed for that context, with techniques designed to be effective without relying on the guy for grips or control.
And it's known for its unique techniques too, right? Like the rubber guard and the lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
Those sound intense. What are those all about?
The rubber guard and the lockdown are just a couple of examples of the innovative techniques that Eddie Bravo brought to the world of grappling. The rubber guard is a system of, like, guard retention and sweeps. It uses flexibility and unusual positioning to control and attack opponents. And the lockdown is another 10th Planet innovation. It uses leg entanglements to control and submit opponents from, the bottom position.
So 10th Planet is all about, like, thinking outside the box, finding new ways to attack and defend.
Exactly. It's about adaptability and finding what works, regardless of tradition. But that kind of unorthodox approach, along with Eddie Bravo's sometimes outspoken personality, has led to some criticism and controversy within the jiu-jitsu community. Some traditional BJJ practitioners question the legitimacy and effectiveness of 10th Planet's techniques.
It sounds like 10th Planet really shook things up in the jiu-jitsu world. But it's interesting how it also highlights the ongoing debate about, like, what makes a martial arts style legitimate? Is it lineage? Is it effectiveness? Or is there something else entirely at play?
That's a great question worth pondering, and it speaks to the dynamic nature of martial arts. They're constantly evolving with new styles and approaches emerging all the time. And the world of jiu-jitsu is like a perfect example of this evolution in action.
It's incredible how much jiu-jitsu has evolved since, the samurai days. You've got all these different branches and styles, each with its own, like, unique flavor. But what I find fascinating is that this evolution seems to be, like, accelerating. What do you think is driving that?
Well, it's a few things, really. Competition is definitely a major factor, The rise of MMA has pushed grapplers to, like, constantly find new ways to be effective in real fights. And then you've got the internet and social media, which have made it so much easier for people to share techniques and ideas across, like, geographical boundaries. So it's like this melting pot of grappling styles and innovations all pushing the art forward. That makes me wonder, what are some of the, like, specific trends you're seeing in jiu-jitsu these days? What's exciting you about the future of grappling?
One of the most noticeable trends is the rise of leg locks. For a long time, leg locks were considered risky and almost taboo in traditional BJJ. But that's changed a lot in recent years.
Why do you think that is? What's behind this sudden surge in leg lock popularity?
I think it's partly due to the influence of other grappling styles, like sambo and catch wrestling. In those styles, leg locks have always been, like, a core part of the game. And as more grapplers started experimenting with leg locks, they started to see how effective they could be, both offensively and defensively. It's almost like this whole new dimension of grappling is opened up. But how does that fit with the kind of traditional BJJ philosophy, which often emphasized joint locks on the upper body?
Oh, it's definitely a shift, but I think it speaks to the adaptability of jiu-jitsu. The core principles of, leverage, technique, and control are still there. They're just being applied in new and innovative ways.
And speaking of innovation, we've been talking about all these different, like, flavors of jiu-jitsu, judo, BJJ, AJJ, 10th Planet. But what about the term American Jiu-Jitsu? There seems to be some debate about whether it's really a distinct style or just, like, a variation of BJJ. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that debate is really interesting. It goes back to like the idea of evolution and adaptation we were talking about earlier. To understand American Jiu-Jitsu, you have to remember that BJJ itself evolved from Judo. And Judo was a refined form of Jiu-Jitsu. So there's already this lineage of adaptation and innovation built into the history of Jiu-Jitsu.
That's a good point. So maybe it's less about arguing whether AJJ is real and more about recognizing it as another step in this ongoing evolution.
Exactly. Each culture, each generation of grapplers adds their own, like, unique flavor to the mix. American wrestlers and grapplers brought their wrestling background and nogi experience to BJJ, and that's going to create some stylistic differences, naturally.
It's like that saying, tradition is just the innovation that worked. So maybe American Jiu-Jitsu is just the innovation that's working for American grapplers.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about techniques, you know? It's also about the training methodology, the culture of the gym, the whole approach to grappling.
You see that especially with 10th Planet. Their gyms have a totally different vibe than traditional BJJ academies, you know?
Yeah.
It's more relaxed, more experimental, more focused on
Yeah.
like individual expression.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes jiu-jitsu so exciting right now. There's this incredible diversity of styles and approaches, and it's all happening in this dynamic, ever-evolving landscape.
But even with all this change and innovation, there's still this common thread running through all the different forms of jiu-jitsu, right?
Definitely. At its core, jiu-jitsu is about using leverage, technique, and control to overcome an opponent, regardless of size or strength. That fundamental principle has been passed down through generations, from the samurai warriors of feudal Japan to the modern grapplers of today.
It's amazing to think how much history and tradition are packed into this one martial art.
It really is, and the best part is it's a history that's still being written. Who knows what the next chapter of jiu-jitsu will bring, but I'm confident it will continue to evolve and adapt just like it always has.
Yeah, it's amazing thinking about those techniques refined over like centuries, and they're still relevant today. It's like a direct connection to those samurai warriors. Speaking of which, I'm curious, what was it like back in those early days of jiu-jitsu? What was training like for those warriors?
Well, imagine a world where your life literally depended on your ability to defend yourself, where combat was a constant threat. For those samurai, jiu-jitsu wasn't just a sport, it was a way of life. It was about survival.
Yeah, it must have been pretty intense. Were those early jiu-jitsu techniques as brutal as we see in like martial arts movies?
Jiu-jitsu definitely had a, practical, no-nonsense approach. The techniques were designed to be effective in real combat situations. Throws, joint locks, strikes, chokes. They used whatever worked to neutralize an opponent, quickly and decisively.
Sounds intense. But I imagine there was also a strong element of like discipline and control, right? It wasn't just about, mindless violence.
Absolutely. Like many martial arts, jiu-jitsu had a strong philosophical component. It wasn't just about fighting, it was about self-control, discipline, and respect for your opponent. Those principles were essential for, mastering the art and using it responsibly.
So those early jiu-jitsu practitioners weren't just like skilled warriors. They were also students of philosophy and ethics.
Exactly. And those principles have been passed down through the generations, shaping the way jiu-jitsu is practiced today. Even with all the changes and innovations, that core philosophy of, respect, discipline, and self-control, it's still at the heart of the art.
It's amazing to think that an art form with such like ancient roots is still so popular today and still so relevant in the modern world.
It really is. It's a testament to human ingenuity and the adaptability of martial arts. Jiu-jitsu has evolved and transformed to meet the demands of, each generation. And yet those fundamental principles of leverage, technique, and control, they're still as effective as ever.
So after this deep dive into jiu-jitsu, I'm like really curious about its future. What do you think the next evolution of this art will look like?
It's hard to say for sure, but what excites me is the open-mindedness and creativity we see in the jiu-jitsu community today. Grapplers are constantly experimenting, blending styles, pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
It seems like the lines between like different grappling styles are becoming more and more blurred. You see people seamlessly transitioning between BJJ, wrestling, judo, sambo. It's like they're taking the best elements of each and creating something totally new.
Yeah, and that cross-pollination is what makes the future of grappling so exciting. I think we're going to see even more hybrid styles emerge, with techniques and strategies that blend the best of different worlds. And who knows, maybe we'll even see entirely new forms of grappling come about, inspired by jiu-jitsu, but taking it in, totally unexpected directions.
It sounds like jiu-jitsu is entering this, like, new golden age. An age of innovation and exploration.
I think so. And the best part is that anyone can be a part of it. Whether you're a seasoned black belt or just starting out, there's always something new to learn and discover in the world of jiu-jitsu.
Well said. This deep dive has been an incredible journey through the history and evolution of jiu-jitsu. We explored its ancient roots, its modern transformations, and the exciting possibilities that lie ahead.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you. And remember, the most important thing is to find a style and a training environment that, resonates with you, where you can learn, grow, and express your own unique grappling journey.
That's a great point. That's the perfect note to end on. So go out there, explore the different styles of jiu-jitsu, find what speaks to you, and most importantly, enjoy the journey.